something that made me think about a question I want to ask you. This is what we thought as players of yours. We felt like when we played St. Ignatius, Coach McD is about to really be on us. We felt like Chuck Kyle was like your Kobe LeBron, Jordan LeBron type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Was Chuck Kyle that coach that really made you great? You know what I mean?
Well, I
don't want to dismiss any other coaches. I'm not trying to do that.
No. He and I are coaching friends, and I have really high regard for him. He should have gone in the National High School Football Hall of Fame yesterday instead of me. Okay. That's how I feel about him. But playing the best teams, it made us better coaches, and it made our players better players. Mm-hmm. And the best teams usually have the best coaches. Gotcha. And he had all the accolades and collected all those state champions. Right. I mean, that didn't happen by accident. He's one of the only head coaches that I coached against who probably could comfortably coach all 22 positions, offense, defense, and include special teams in that. He was also an English teacher. There was a little something extra. Right. Now, that would never be something that we talk about to the kids.
No.
And I learned this too as a younger guy. Don't ever make it personal. Not me. I should never make, playing an opponent personal, because just because it's personal to me doesn't mean it's personal to Daniel Stella. And the kids shouldn't make it personal either. Right. If we're playing a rival or a neighborhood or another, Austintown Fitch or whoever happens to be, and your cousin, nobody cares, because it wasn't going to be personal for everybody. And I had made that mistake in the past. So we didn't allow it to be like that, because I don't think that sells. That doesn't win, because it isn't going to be personal for everybody.
I know Dante in a minute going to get into a couple Warren G. Harding questions. Coach, I got a fun question for you.
Yeah.
All right. Probably going to have a couple of, I ain't going to say a couple of us, because I know I'm not going to be on the list, but a couple people might feel the type of way. But it's a fun question, Coach. All right. You got Canton McKinley, Warren G. Harding. I'm going to give you skill positions on offense. I know you're mostly an offensive coach. You get 2 quarterbacks, 2 tailbacks, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, but 1 from each school. Can you give me those, Coach?
Oh, man. These.
I got him, y'all. Canton McKinley Harding. I had to ask, Coach.
Oh, my God.
I had to ask, Coach. I know I'm the all-time holder, so I'm not trying to be on the rest of that. So.
Hey, we had to give you at least one hard question.
That's impossibly
right.
hard. It would be Ben as the quarterback at McKinley.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
Got to be tough for you, Coach, the amount of talented players and good football players you've coached.
Well, Mikey starts as a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
Coco transfers in. Mikey's also a defensive starter. So the 2002, we made that run playing 2 people.
Right.
And it was good for us.
Yep.
And both Mikes handled that well.
Yes.
And the families, I thought, handled it well.
Yes.
Because each of them, in their own right, could have been the every down
absolutely.
dude. But
and in the
that
vacuum,
didn't always sell in the community.
Exactly, Coach.
Okay,
we understand it. And in the vacuum, they were both Division I football players.
Yes, they were.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So. However, the next year with Alex Ingram, who was also a Division I, he's the only quarterback that I ever had. He went the entire season without throwing an interception. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that, Coach.
And so, oh my goodness, you're not going to
all 3 of them, Coach. Right.
Well, and here's another interesting little thing. Mario had his most successful and productive individual year with Roger Matlock as his quarterback.
Well, Coach, I don't know if you remember. Coach. You brought me on as a student coach. That was my first year coaching. I don't know if you remember, Coach.
I do. Yeah,
that was the year because we played Mario at tailback that year. Played receiver.
Yes.
That was the year Mario caught the interception against Glenville. I still remember you hollering at me on the phones, like, should we put him in or not? And I'm so young, like, yeah, coach, put him in. Yeah, put him in. He go in, he catch it, and he go down.
Baited the kid, you know.
So good.
But I
Right.
you're not gonna get me to talk about one guy.
Gotcha, Coach.
From Warren Harding.
All right, welcome back to Between the Lines with Coach Stella, Legends Edition from Buena Vista Cafe here in Warren. We have Hall of Fame Coach THOM MCDANIELS with us, and now we're going to segue into your time here in the Dub with Warren G. Harding. So you depart from McKinley, your state champions, your national champions, and then after that, you retired. You just took some time off from the game.
A week after the state championship game, the superintendent, who was a childhood friend of mine, he was the superintendent of Canton. He reached out to me because the athletic director for the Kansas City schools, and there were 2 high schools at the time. There was Canton McKinley, and then 4 middle schools. So he was the AD supervising that whole operation. He was going to retire at the end of December, and they offered me that job. And I'm an English teacher in my 26th year, and I'm making maybe $42,000. Okay. And you can retire in the state teacher retirement system at 30, and I was never going to retire at that. That's too young. But I could double my salary overnight. And in my 26th year, I'm thinking this financially speaking, this was a good thing for me to do, because my retirement in the state teacher retirement system is based on the average of your best 3 years. Okay, so I'm going to double my salary, and you know, if I do that job, you know, half as well as I did the coaching job, they weren't going to fire me, and I was just going to make more money, you know, the longer I stayed in that position. So from a financial standpoint, that seemed like the right thing to do. So I took the job, and 6 weeks into it, I'm a miserable human being, because I'm dealing with 100 people who want to sit at half court for the McKinley tournament game in basketball, and I needed to deal with kids, because that's who I needed to interact with on a daily basis. So I started looking for a head coaching job, because they replaced me at McKinley. And I applied at Cincinnati Princeton. I applied at Worthington. I applied at Glen Oak. I applied at John Carroll. The college coach retired. But I needed to get back into coaching. And Gary, yes, he resigned. And this is like 2 years later. This is now like 99, 2000 school year.
My freshman year, 99, 2000 school year.
So I called Paul Trina about the opening, and I said, I'm interested if you'd have an interest in talking to me. And first of all, he wanted to know, well, why? I said, because I'm not happy being an athletic director. I got more years of coaching. I want to get back into coaching. So they interviewed me. He recommended me. They hired me. We moved to Warren or Trumbull County, and the rest is history. But that's how I ended up coming here. I chose Warren, and then Warren accepted me.
Now, Coach, I remember when you got hired.
Yes.
If my memory is right, it was basketball season. Wintertime basketball season.
I believe it was. Yes,
I think
because
so.
I remember coming over at the end of say April and May to do evening conditioning and workouts in the gym.
Yeah.
It was probably.
I think it was, Coach, because I remember we were playing. Because if you remember, Mike and Prescott was starting varsity basketball that year as freshmen. we were playing somebody, we were blowing them out. We were sitting at the end of the bench. I remember you walking in with Mr. Trina. You know, you could feel the buzz a little bit. And I just remember everybody like, that's our new football coach. I'm so young and immature. I'm like, man, I don't care. I want to get in the game. Like, why not in the game? I don't go. So I remember that, Coach. I remember that.
Well,
Mr. Trina, good job taking that call.
what's interesting about that, and again, this is not something that the general public would be aware of. The head coach that replaced me at McKinley, he was there 2 years, and he left. He announced that he was leaving the position in like May of 2000.
2000? Okay.
2000. And the superintendent called me back and he said, if we let you remain the AD and the head football coach, because they wouldn't let you have both jobs.
Right.
Some places they do. Canton City wouldn't let you do that because you were going to cheat one of those jobs.
Yep.
With 2 high schools and 4 middle schools,
Mm-hmm.
you know, who's running that
Exactly.
when I'm at football practice, whatever. He said, if we let you keep the AD's job and hire you back as the football coach, would you consider that? I said, no. I made a commitment to the people in Warren, to the kids in Warren. I met with them. I'd already started activities with them. And so I said, no, I can't do that. That's not the right thing for me to do. So I came to Warren.
Let me ask you this, Coach.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you this question for a reason. All right, so what's your favorite memory of coaching me or being around me if you have one? All right, Coach. And then, or if somebody was to just say my name around you and I popped up in your brain, what was the first thing? The reason why I'm asking you that, because I'm going to tell you now on the flip side for me as a coach, the number one moment that always pops in my brain. But go ahead, Coach.
Well, in this may be
Coach, it's okay.
painful for both.
No, it's okay.
So it's 2000, and I'm the new guy, and you know they got a summer calendar, and we're conditioning, and we're lifting, and everything is copacetic, and we get to the first week of what were then 2-a-day practices. I don't think they even have those now, but we had morning first, you know, AM and PM,
yeah.
whatever, and we start, and I think it started on a Wednesday. Midweek, I'm not sure why they always just say they did that. But we practiced Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I think it was Steve Arnold comes onto the field with a group of kids, and you were one of them. It was a handful of kids, and he hadn't been at practice, he hadn't shown up, and neither had the kids that he was with. And Steve came with the kids on their behalf, asking me if it was too late for them to come out for football. And I told him, yeah, it's too late for them to come out for football. And he explained to me that they had summer jobs, and the job requirement required that they work until a certain point in
time in
time.
the summer, yep.
Okay. And I said, I understand that. I feel bad about that. But we've just had 8 practices, and I don't know how they make those 8 days up. And I don't know how I explained that to those kids who were here for those 8 days. And it, you know, it was one of those moments early in my time where I was going to make a decision that was going to affect the kids perhaps, and me too with the program, but I only had one opportunity to get this right. And so I stuck by this decision, and he didn't play, and neither did the other kids. Now, there was no animosity, no hate involved, because when he came back the next year, he was a welcome addition, you know, to our program.
Mm-hmm.
But Danny was what do you call that? A Swiss Army knife. You know, he could play safety. He could be receiver. You know, he was bigger and thicker than some of the other receivers. So, you know, we could utilize him as an inside guy.
I think I was the first Z to come in motion in ISO block.
You might have been.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, or PK.
Or I don't want to say the first, that I've seen
Yes.
like watching football. Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But we, you made me think of this. We bring Prescott in motion, lead on the backer, and we had the fullback follow through and clean up on a cover four safety because sometimes you couldn't block
Can't
that.
block that cover four safety.
But those are my early memories of Danny. But he could play multiple places on both sides of the ball. He had great ball skills. He was sharp as a tack. He could make calls in the secondary if we needed him to make those calls in the secondary. Those are.
I appreciate that.
I don't know how. I don't know what specific.
I'm gonna tell you where I'm gonna go after it. I just want all my kids I coach in football to listen. That's all. Listen. But the reason why I say that though, Coach, seriously, because as a coach, at the time I didn't know. Now that I started coaching, I'm grown. I'm a father. I don't think you know how much that shaped me and helped me. Number one, because you got to be held accountable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to be held accountable. Nobody's bigger than the team. Nobody's bigger than the program.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Including Maurice Claret.
Including Maurice Claret, who coach left. The bus pulled off. Maurice Claret pulled up. Coach said we leaving at 5:30. It's 5:29. Pull off. So nobody was bigger than the program. But the part that made me fall in love with you as a coach and want to come back and play is I was telling these guys was when the first week of school came, Coach would come see me about 3-4 times a week. I don't know if you remember this, Coach. It wouldn't be like, come get me out of class. Sometimes I get out of class, Tony, oh, what's up, Coach? Hey, Danny, how you doing? Just wanted to check on you.
Yeah.
Good luck in basketball, that type of season.
Yeah.
So it let me know as a man, okay, this is the type of person I want to play for. Then now me as a coach, that's part of my philosophy. Like I can holler at you all day in practice. I might have to kick you off a team. I might have to kick you out of practice. But it's never going to be personal. It's always for the betterment of you and for the betterment of the team. So I appreciate you for that, Coach.
I just thought it would be a bad precedent for me to set to let. And you probably know the other kids that were part of that group.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a large group, but I didn't think I could establish the culture that we wanted here. And I thought the culture needed to change here.
You did what you were supposed to do.
That's what I was bringing
And from what we know now as growing up, that's what we needed at that time.
Yeah.
This city, this football program, we needed that at the time. So, Coach, I love you forever for it. It helped shape me as a person and as a coach. But, I kind of get to mess with Mike Phillips and them because I tell him, that was the only year we ain't made the playoffs now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just saying. So, go ahead, Dante.
Yes.
All right, well, I'm glad you brought up Maurice Claret because your first season at Harding was, if I'm following the timeline correct, it was 2000.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And Maurice Claret, he was the first at Harding your first season with the Raiders, correct? Or was it your second?
He was at Harding the year before as a sophomore.
So it was his second year at Harding, his first year with Coach. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So I have him as a junior.
Yep. So
Yes.
Reese has him as a coach, has him as a junior. It's his second year at Harding, but first year with Coach.
Okay. When was the first time you ever heard of Maurice Claret and you met Maurice Claret? First impressions.
I hadn't seen him play, but I had heard about him because McKinley. We played and remember I was out of coaching for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But we played Boardman and we played Fitch and we played Warren Harding and we played Mooney but I had heard about a guy that started in Youngstown. He was at Fitch for a year, and then he goes to Warren Harding, but he was supposed to be special.
Right.
And I hadn't seen him play, but I had heard about him. And he was probably the guy that I had this saying, expect the most from the best. We talked about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that made me commit to that. And we had a little dust up during the course of the season. We fed the kids pregame meals, and not everybody got to eat pregame meal. That was one of the things you had to earn.
Mm-hmm.
Say it was the top 40.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to pregame meal before a game, and he didn't attend. He didn't show. And when he showed up later, I asked him where he was, and if you had an excuse for not being here. He said, no. I said, I wasn't hungry. I said, okay, then you attend and don't eat. but you don't get to just not show up for a pregame meal that some other kid could have had, you know, and he didn't like my response to him, and I didn't like his response to me. And so we're playing at Ursuline at YSU. And I said, you're not dressing, you're not playing, we're not taking you. And we lost tough.
Yep.
Was it 13-7?
Yeah.
It was
Like 13-7, 13-10, somewhere like that.
But with him, you know, I'm certain we'd have gotten a different outcome. Well, he really didn't like the fact that he didn't get to play or dress or travel with us. I think he found his way on the sideline, but he was not going with us. That's just a policy that I had, and he didn't handle that real well. So I didn't play him the next week, and we played at Youngstown City School.
Well, I remember, Coach, because that was the year I didn't play either. But I remember being in the stands because I remember the Ursuline game for sure.
Yeah.
Because we had the ball. I want to say it was inside the 10 for sure.
Yeah.
But I want to say it was like first and goal from the 6.
Okay.
So and I remember that, and it was like 13-9. I think we lost. Yep.
Yeah.
But I was off the team, but I went to every game because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Coach. By the time we got to week 4, week 5, like this one, I felt bad, like as far as not playing and not being there for my coaches and my teammates, because I looked out there, it was pretty much my whole class.
Yeah.
Mike was starting quarterback.
Yeah.
Tree was starting receiver. James Johnson was starting linebacker.
Yeah.
Demetrius Incretus was playing. LeVar Allen was playing. So I was like, man. So
I was never afraid to play young guys who deserve to play. Never. That's been with me. But anyway, he didn't play the next week, and we won. And you know, Maurice was converted. And he was a model player for me from that point on, which is, you know, the remainder of that season, and then the next year when we had a great year and lost to Iggy in the Rubber Bowl. And I have a great relationship with him to this day.
You mentioned the Rubber Bowl. I think the Akron Beacon Journal just put some images of what it looks like now. Looking back on it, because you know that was a staple when you were playing. That's been a staple in all your years coaching over the span of 2 decades. You know, is it weird when you see the Rubber Bowl now? It doesn't even look remotely like a stadium.
No, that we knew that if you were in the playoffs, and this started at Canton, that eventually you were going to have to go through the Rubber Bowl, because the state association had a history of, you know, whether it's week 2 or 3 or whatever, somewhere along the line, when you got deep, you were going to play somebody from, you know, the Toledo area or the Cleveland area, or whatever. So that was, you know, that sort of was one of those indicators that you were special. You had a good team, and I felt the same way about it when we played there from here. There were some memorable games and memorable events that took place in that state. That 81 state championship that we won my second years in Cisco, that was against Boulder in the Rubber. We won 13-0.
Gotcha. Coach, I'm gonna say a couple names. Just give me a sentence, a couple words, whatever come to your brain. All right. Mike Phillips.
Ben and Josh made this point to me, and I agree. They thought he was the best high school cornerback that they had seen. They didn't think that in their playing experience,
right.
And again, they didn't know every opponent as well as they knew
They
their
were
own
coming
teammates.
around. They were there.
Yeah,
right.
but they thought Mike was the best corner
Mike,
in high school.
that's big time, Mike. You got an NFL head coach, NFL position coach, saying they thought you were the best high school corner. I agree, but I say it all the time. People think I'm biased. So next name, Coach, I'm gonna go Rob Masucci.
I ran into Rob. I had my car serviced at Ford dealer in Stark County last week, and so they're, you know, rotating tires, changing my oil, and I'm sitting in the waiting room, and I got my iPad, and I'm a reader, so I'm reading, and there's an elderly lady who's in the room with me. There were only 2 in the room, and this this person walks in the room, and I looked up because I saw the move, and it's him, and he looks at me, and so I mean he wasn't expecting to see me in that environment, and I wasn't expecting to see, and he's a tech guy,
Yep.
and you know that dealership is one of his, you know, he services that dealership. So we had a great little visit. He said I told him I was coming over here to do this, and he told me he had run into you at the store not that long.
At Walmart.
Okay, yes. But Robbie was a move-in.
Yep.
And he was a smaller version and a different position group offensively because he was a running back, but he was a DB too. But I mean he was a really good football player.
Yes.
In a smaller body, very quick.
Extremely tough.
Yeah, and one of the really good memories I have when we played Maslin here, and it was a great game. We won, but at some point, I mean, Mario returned a kick.
Yeah, that was the Mario game.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he had 2 catches. At one point, they scored, and they kicked off, and they kicked it out of bounds on purpose. Okay, we refused the penalty. No, we didn't take the ball.
Mm-hmm.
We made them kick it again.
Yep.
And they kicked the ball out of bounds again because they didn't want to kick the ball to Mario. And so this is the 3rd time. And so the next time they kicked it to Robbie, and he returned it past the 50.
Yep.
So
Robbie was good, Coach.
Yes, yeah, he
I'll
was.
give you 3 more names, Coach. Tremaine Warfield. Tree Warfield.
Well, the name preceded him, you know,
Right.
before I knew Tremaine because of the Warfield name. Long and cared deeply about being a receiver, and he wasn't a thick guy, but he was a tough guy because it you know, a lot of guys built like that, you know, they want to like fades and posts and deep routes, but you know, not crossing routes necessarily, and maybe weren't tough. Well, he was tough, you know, and it didn't matter what route we ran. And again, he's a wide out, and we got Maurice in the backfield, you know, and
He's
so
licking his chops out there.
David Heron and you know, Robbie Masucci behind. I mean, Richard
Davis waiting to play.
Yeah, you know. So we probably threw the ball more after Trey was here. You know, like Mario maybe had more catches in a single season, but we didn't have what we had at running back then. But you know, earlier we talked about, you know, the best quarterbacks, but Tremaine would be in that list of the best guys that I ever had, either at Canton McKinley or Walmart.
2 more, Coach. James Johnson.
Oh man, J-Rock, right?
J-Rock. Ready to rock, J-Rock. Hitman Jimmy the G. Big Game James. I don't know if you can coach. I don't know if you don't know the nicknames. He gave them to himself.
Well, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. I loved him, and he's an undersized linebacker.
5'10", 165 pounds.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that because this man will not give you an extra pound, an extra centimeter, nothing.
No.
So James Johnson is the only linebacker I ever seen make first team All-State. 165 pounds.
Yeah, I didn't even lie about Ben's height and weight when he started as a sophomore. He's like 137, and I said he's 137. Anyway. He didn't know he wasn't supposed to play linebacker, you know, but he was physical and he was tough and he was fast and ideally, I mean, not that we did anything wrong with him. We had him at the right place, but with those people playing, you know, like the 4-2-5.
The yes, Coach. I know where you're going.
Yeah. He'd have been that star or whatever because he was. Oh yeah, I loved him as a football player, he was violent and unafraid and confident.
Yes,
You know?
too confident.
That's where those nicknames came from.
On his own. All right, last one, coach, is I'm trying to. What I'm trying to do is because a lot of kids in Warren don't even know a lot of the main names.
Sure.
Of course, they know Mario. Of course, they heard of Reese and Lynn Bolden. A lot of them don't know Mike Phillips. A lot of them don't know how good Tree Warfield was. So that's why I'm naming some of these guys. So the last one I go with is LeVar Allen, Pudge.
Yes. Different position group, O-line, D-line. Another guy that was tough, built low to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
hard to double team, had the attitude of a skilled position guy, you know.
Yes. Swag. He had swag.
If he'd have been a wideout, we couldn't have coached him, you know, because he'd have been a prima donna. But I love him for that too,
Right.
because I mean, you know, we got to be careful about words we use
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. Coach, you good. Go ahead. Do your thing.
Okay, I mean, I know a guy that told me that you're not worth anything unless you have a penny's worth of prick in you, and he had more than a penny's
Yeah,
worth.
about
of
10
prick
cents?
in him, yes. But I mean, I love the Warren kids. I meant it when I said this at the beginning of this, that the 7 of the best years of my life were spent right here.
Gotcha.
And the Warren kids, just generally speaking, they bought into the culture sooner than they did in Canton. And I felt like they were less spoiled. They were hungrier. I mean, you talk about running and hitting.
And I think, Coach, obviously I didn't buy in. I wasn't going to practice. I got kicked off the team. But I think we bought in more as a community because you came off a time to where we felt like Harding just had their most talented teams ever. I'm sure you played against them, 97.
Yes, yeah, they were a pain in the
They
butt
were
to
a pain
play.
in the butt and loved
Terrible.
it. But if you can remember, a lot of them teams didn't even make it to the playoffs. Yeah. So I think it was like Coach Barber did a great job. It was like we were looking for this piece because we know we got the talent here and we know it was coming. So I think you coming in, I think that's part of the reason why we bought in even more. So go ahead, Dante. I got 2 more questions and I'm going to let you go. Coach, get out your way.
I was always at the right time and the right place more often than anybody should have been. You know, and we're not always in control of timing in place, but I'm the luckiest guy I know because me coming to Warren at that was fate. You know, it wasn't an intention by me, but no, I was the beneficiary.
Gotcha.
And, you know, in the early 2000s, you guys are able, you and your staff and the players you coach are able to get back to the state championship game. Stella, you were on that team. You were the leader of that team. This was in the wake of Maurice Claret leaving, but then you have another superstar in Mario Manningham on the team. You guys are able to get to the state championship game, have a perfect season. Unfortunately, you fall to a team that is similar. Just take us through that season. I mean, what are your memories? You know, Coach Stella, you as a player. You know, Coach THOM MCDANIELS, you as a coach. Just that was a magical team.
The first memory and recollection I have of that, and Danny will remember this. It's at Fawcett at that time. It was Fawcett Stadium in Canton, and we get this big unexpected snowfall, and so they delay the start of the game because they gotta sweep the yard lines and the sidelines because you couldn't see them.
You couldn't see no lines or no numbers or yard markers. Couldn't see them.
Okay. And I was a big pregame timetable dude. Okay. We always went out to warm up an hour and 10 minutes before kickoff. And then Danny knows every single minute wasn't accounted for, but we'd have, you know, we do this for this long and this for this long.
I was just happy I went out with specialty, so I was out and I didn't have to worry about it.
Yes. And then we always went back in the locker room, you know, before kickoff at this precise time, and then we came out at this precise time. Well, when they delayed the start of the game, so they cleaned the sidelines and the yard lines, I don't think that I handled that delay the right way. This is me being judgmental of me, and I didn't know it at the time, but I did not handle that the right way, and I would do that differently. And I think it affected the beginning of the game. because we didn't get off to a great beginning. And we were pretty much, that's who we were. I mean,
jump right on you.
When we were not a team that took a quarter and a half to get into the game. But I blame myself. I think when they told us that, I should have brought you in, had you take your shoulder pads off, sit down, relax, and converse quietly. But I didn't do that. And thinking back, I should have done that. The weather, I never ever blamed an outcome on the weather, and I'm not about to do that now. But we had an advantage that was minimized, and that was speed and quickness.
Yep.
And so, but that's not why we lost. We lost because I didn't manage the pregame delay well, I also am not happy with the 2-point play that we ran at the end to try to tie the score at 21-21.
I think you're being too hard on yourself.
But
that's what we do, though.
But that's where I'm going to begin. Right. You know those coaches meetings the day before you all came in. You know, I wasn't always happy with me. Right. And again, this is how many years later? Yeah. Okay. 21
well, 21.
Okay.
20 years from my high school graduation, but 21 from the football season.
And I never ever said this either, but I'm old. Okay, and it's never too late to change.
And so I'm gonna say something I never said either when you get done, Coach.
Did you play?
A little bit.
But you weren't healthy?
No.
Did Prescott play?
Yeah. A little bit.
But he was hobbled.
Yeah, he was hobbled, yeah.
And what happened to Mikey?
Yeah, Michael got hobbled
on the first offensive series.
Mike got hurt.
And now they had a wideout, and Mikey was matched on that dude. Yep. And he had an ankle, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And it was in our first possession, and he started every game.
Yep, he started every game. Yep.
And I don't think we played him from that point on offensively because we needed him defensively. So, I mean, we're talking about some pretty good players that were not available to us. And again, I would never use that as an excuse at that point in time, but that affected the outcome. And we clawed our way back into the game. Yep. And their quarterback killed us.
Yes.
Yes. It was either by design runs for him, or he dropped back to pass, and we have good coverage. He couldn't throw the ball
because he was only looking at the guy that Mike covered.
We did a great job on him, and then he'd take off, and he improvised, and he hurt us.
And that was before a time where you didn't see running quarterbacks or improvised quarterbacks every week. Now in football nowadays, you might see one.
Well, you want to ask me about that improvised quarterback thing if we have time.
Right.
Okay. I have a feeling about that.
This is what I feel, Coach, honestly, about that year. I felt like it was my fault. This is how I look at it, Coach. I felt like the night before, the days before, me and Mike talk about it all the time. We knew we should have had most of the team stay at our house. We knew this, but we didn't. I literally blame myself. I don't look at nobody else. That's just me, how I look at it. But we did. You know, it is what it is. Certain people, we weren't ready when it was game day. Okay. And not to say too much. Right. But they were doing what they were doing. That's what they always did. To me, as somebody who was a captain and leader on the team, I felt like I should have, between me and Mike's house, we could have had enough for the top 40 to stay there. Yeah. So I get mad at myself for that. Second thing, Coach, I didn't play a lot of defense that game. I was so mad at Coach Doda because he wouldn't put me in. But instead of being a great leader and making sure the guys were into it, like, I don't know if you know, you coach and you don't know everything, but like on the sideline, everybody's asking me, because, to go back, I just think they were more comfortable hearing my voice out there. Necessarily not to make the plays, but like, Stephon Alexander and James, like they used to me being behind them and hearing a check or just hearing a code word I might give them, whatever it is. But every after every possession, they would just come ask me what was going on. I was so selfish in that moment, worried about me not playing.
See, I wouldn't have never been aware of that.
But what I should have just was handled them better. Because it took them till we started coming back to get focused.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of like, it was part of what made us great, hurt us that day, Coach. Part of what made us great is we knew each other. Like that crew, we knew each other our whole life. And I'm just talking about the seniors, from seniors to 10th grade, that 3 to 4 year block, we have been playing against each other our whole life, knowing each other our whole life. And like, Mike was probably always the best player, but I was probably always the most vocal leader.
Sure.
And so, you know, you get used to playing with that person.
Yeah.
And they couldn't handle the moment. I could, but I was selfish. That's why I blame myself, Coach.
I did not know that.
That's why I blame myself,
I didn't
Coach.
know that you felt that way.
Yep.
Well,
And I feel that way to this day. I always
there's me blaming me and you blaming you, and that's what I call competitive people and people who aren't afraid to critique themselves.
Yeah, Coach. That was absolutely that. Like you can put a lot of texture on me right now, Coach. I feel like that those days were my fault.
Well, you remember the deep ball to Mario at the closed end of the field? It was like a play action post.
Yeah, I remember, Coach.
And he caught it in the very, very back of the end zone, and they ruled it incomplete. And on the sidelines, I didn't have a good view of that.
Right.
And the I don't know. The film doesn't reveal.
Film don't reveal.
No.
It was so much snow with the white lines and
but
not
I
as many
mean,
cameras as you have today. So.
that was. I'm sure it was. That play action post was a cover 4 beater for us, and no, we executed that well. We just I don't know.
Yep, but I blame myself though.
Coach, yesterday when you talk so fondly about your time here, hard, how hungry our athletes are, and it feels like you've embraced. I know you live in Stark County and you're very accomplished at McKinley, but it feels like you've embraced our city so much. So when you took your induction yesterday, and you were thinking about everything that got you here, I said you guys are getting really emotional about this. Did you think about that team in the early 2000s that did what State wish we would have had?
I just said a few minutes earlier that Chuck Kyle should have been inducted instead of me. He's won more games and he's won more state championships. I don't. It is what it is. They inducted me, but they wouldn't have done it without the 7 years and more. It wouldn't have happened. There have been some other guy, as a coach from Ohio being inducted without the 7 years and Warren. This is another story that you won't be aware of. There were coaches on my staff when I took the job in Warren. And again, we played you guys.
Yeah.
And we were winning
most of the time.
Most of them.
Yeah.
When I took the job before I left Canton, there were guys on my staff that told me that I couldn't win there because they weren't disciplined. And okay, that got filed away in my own personal bulletin board. And when I took the job, I had no doubt that we could be good because they ran like crazy and hit like dynamite. And the whole thing was take structure and organization and discipline and expectation. Take that to those kids and we'll see. We'll see. And we did, and they responded, and those guys were sorry that they said that to me. You can't win. You can't win there. They're not disciplined.
I know this though, Coach. This is my memory of playing against Canton McKinley as you as a coach. I don't know if you remember this. We walking in, everything time. We walking in. Remember at the old Mollenkoff, this is when the actual visitor side would be packed.
Yes.
Like it's actually all Canton McKinley fans, not just like Canton McKinley here, all.
Yeah.
And they were like just, talking crazy, saying some stuff about you. I think this is my junior year. Coach. We come out. I don't know if you remember. They go up 7-0.
Yeah.
Or it might have been my senior
Took
year.
the ball right down.
They go right down the field on us. Like, this is my senior year. We were so emotional before the game because we were so mad because they was talking about coach. But it was 55-7. So,
Well,
that's all I'm saying. 55-7 was the end. So leave my coach alone. I think Maslin said something about my coach too. It didn't end well for them. So I'm just saying.
yeah. But that's how significant Warren was. And I didn't need to be inducted yesterday to feel that way. I've said this to anybody who's ever asked me. No, that's the line. The 7 years in Warren are 7 of the best years, and my wife feels that way too. And we've been in Canton for 20 years, and I up and take the job in Warren. I'm gonna take her out of where she's lived for 20 years and all her friends and I mean, that was a big deal.
Right.
And it didn't take her long to fall in love with Warren either. She feels the same way. She feels that it was 7 of the best years of her life.
That's good.
So I'll always have a special place. I felt like the community as a whole, you always have detractors, but this community as a whole accepted me and bought into how I wanted to go about my business sooner and better than they ever did in Canton.
Gotcha.
There's way more detractors in Canton.
Gotcha, Coach.
Promise me.
You kind of just touched on something. I got 2 more questions in one segment, and we're going to try to get you out of here, Coach.
Okay.
Talking to young coaches, young kids, young players, any young male or female that's out there, can you talk to them about how important it is to have somebody like Mrs. McD in your corner to be able to do everything you wanted to do?
One of the best decisions or the worst decisions we make is head coaches specifically is in who we choose to marry. That's a critical call. And there's guys that got it right and there's guys that got it wrong. I got it right. She was competitive as can be. She grew up one of 4 kids and the other 3 were boys. Check. She was a cheerleader. Check. She knows more about the game of football than any other woman I've ever met. Now, part of that she learned from me because her brothers played football, but they weren't coaches. But I mean, she knew the difference between cover 2 and cover 4 because of the depth and alignment of safeties. But she managed the household when my kids were little and they weren't coming to practice yet. She tolerated the time away, and I didn't work NFL hours, but I worked long, hard high school hours. And we had so many Saturday games in Canton and here too, that when we had Saturday games, we practice for 5 days and go scouting Friday night and then come coach the game and then meet on Sunday. We were 7 days a week often. But she was an amazing wife who understood and bought in. If I came home early, she'd wonder why I was home already. What are you doing home? But she was, and she learned to deal with criticism too, not of her sons. No. She was ready to claw at eyeballs when they cursed her or questioned or something. She tolerated it. She was going up the stands in Mollenkoff, and there's a guy sitting down the aisle. And I'd been here a couple of years, and the guy looks at her and recognizes who she is, and they make eye contact, and he says, "I don't like your husband's personality." She says, "I didn't think he had one."
That's a good one right there, Miss McD.
She was quick. She was quick for that.
Quick and competitive.
Yes.
Shout out to Miss McD. I love you. You. Okay.
Hey, well, I've never met Miss McDaniels, but she sounds like just a wonderful
She's
woman.
feisty now.
Oh, really?
She's feisty now. Yeah.
I just want to ask you about your sons. Another aspect of your family that's very competitive. You just got to be so proud. Having 2 sons that are prominent coaches in the NFL, and Josh McDaniels is one of the most respected coordinators in the National Football League over the past decade. and now he's back as a head coach with the Raiders. Just what are some of you and your wife's fondest memories of his career in the NFL, or most memorable ones as well?
Well, I will go back a little bit further. I don't know if I told you this already, and if I did, interrupt me and stop. But they got to come to practice when they were like 4 or 5, and the deal was you're going to eat your green beans, at supper. You don't get to go to two-a-days, okay? And you got to behave, and you can't get in the way. And so those were the guidelines, and then they got to come to practice with me. And I have 3 sons, but the oldest boy isn't a coach. He works for the Stark County Auditor. But they were at McKinley practices at 4 and 5, and we have pictures of them. Now I'm going to Vegas practice next week and Texans practice the following week. I get to go if I behave and I don't get in the way.
It's switched.
It's switched. Yes, it's role reversal.
The evolution of life.
Totally. Yes, and so I know something about behaving and not getting in the way. And so okay, I'm
Now,
not.
Coach, this is
worried.
the question. Are they nicer to you when they tell you don't get out the way than you were when you told them?
Well, Josh he's actually nervous when I'm there, and if you've never been in an NFL practice, it is. I mean, when they go from one segment to the next, it is.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of bodies,
Yes.
especially during training camp, and it happens quickly. And they'll stick special team individual or team in the middle of the practice. And I'm generally behind the ball, whether it's the scout team or whether it's the starting O. I stay behind the ball, and a lot of times I'm out on the field right behind the center and quarter, you know what I mean, but at a distance.
Right.
But sometimes, I got caught up in the change from, it's the end of an O period and we're going to kickoff. And I
Mayhem.
and he's yelling at one of his, he's not yelling at me. He said, "Get him out of here! Get him up!" But I was just for maybe seconds I was in the way, But no, I'm very proud of them. They both knew when they were young that they wanted to coach. And there was something that occurred in public education that encouraged me to encourage them to get into college football. I can't even remember what it was, but there was a change occurring in public education, and I think it just, never mind, that's another topic.
Right.
But anyway, they go away, they play John Carroll and Kent, and they graduate, and so I'm going to try to help them get a graduate assistantship. And so everybody that was any good, they recruited Canton McKinley at the time because we had Division I players, and we did here too. So I knew everybody, and they came for the players. They didn't come for me. But I had contacts. Josh got one offer to be a GA, and it was with Nick Saban at Michigan State. Ben got one offer with all the contacts we had because it's very competitive, okay? And his was with Glenn Mason at Minnesota. And I remember telling them both the same thing. The day I took them and dropped them off was this is when my influence ends. I can't help you anymore because they're not going to care what your dad or your high school has to say. They're going to care what Nick Saban says about you, and they're going to care what Glenn Mason, what kind of recommendation they. And I said, so I don't care what it is. You do it better than anybody's ever done it before. If they tell you to make coffee, you do it better than anybody. If they tell you to go pick up a recruit at the airport, you do it better than anybody's ever done it before. And I assume that they took that advice and ran with it. But we never considered NFL. But there was a GA a year at Michigan State ahead of Josh, who, when he finished his second year, he got hired in at the Patriots as an entry-level dude.
Okay.
He was about 20 years old. He made $20,000. And he worked 20 hours a day. That's what you sign up for as a quality controller, GA, or whatever in the NFL. Well, the next year they elevated him, which made an opening, and so Bill says to Brian Dable, head coach of the Giants at the time, he's that. He said, "Do you know a guy?" He says, "Yeah, I know a guy. His name's Josh McDaniel." So Josh went in, and he was the entry-level dude drawing the cards and running the scout team and, the whole thing. They elevated him. Josh, do you know a guy? Yeah, Nick Casario.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick Casario he's the GM, at Houston.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so it all worked out, but it worked because you be great at the job you have to get the job you want. That was another axiom that made sense. Whatever it is, if you can't demonstrate greatness at running a scout team, then why should you expect anything to, you know what I mean? But they bought into that.
Gotcha.
And I feel the same way about if you're the holder,
Yes.
be great at the job you have to get the job you want. Or a gunner, and nobody grew up wanting to be a gunner.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody grew up and wanted to be a holder, but
I loved it.
yes,
I loved it.
Yeah, that was my mentality when I was in college, when I was working at the Tribune Chronicle. Just shout out to them, John Bargo and all of them.
Sure.
That was my mentality. And then when I was
good for you.
Then when I was an intern at WFMJ, that led to me getting a part-time opportunity to be an anchor. So I believe that philosophy wholeheartedly as well. Coach, again, thank you for taking time to be with us today. I just have one more question because I follow you on Twitter. You're very vocal about the playoff expansion in the OHSAA. And I think you give very, very interesting takes every time I see you tweet because, not only just because you're a Hall of Famer, but because you're a great coach and you're a legend in the state. You've done great at 2 historic programs. So I think if anybody should pay attention to somebody speaking on the expansion, it's THOM MCDANIELS. So you can just talk about that a little bit.
There's something called the High School Football Coaches Association.
Yeah.
There are 16 regions in the state of Ohio, and each region has a representative. Okay, so you got 16 directors, that's what they're called. And then there's a first vice president, second vice president, president, and a past. Those are the officers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I became the regional director, in the Canton area, and worked my way up and through the first vice president, and so on. And when I started, coaching at Canton McKinley in '80, 2 teams qualified for the playoffs. And there were only 3 divisions.
Wow.
Okay, so they took out of 4 quadrants, so 2, 4, 6. There were 8 teams that qualified statewide in D1, or it was called Division 1, 2, and 3 at the time, or A, AA, and AAA even. Okay, and that wasn't enough. My first year, we go 8-2. I lose to Moeller and McKinley, and we don't make the playoffs. And they played for the state championship. So at some point, as a director, I fought for expansion. And then it went to 4 qualifiers. Okay, so that just took it from 8 to 16.
Right.
He helped me with the math. I was an English teacher. We didn't just expand in terms of the number of qualifiers, but the number of divisions. Okay, and I think we went from 3 to 5, and I think 5 was right. Okay, and the way it works is for Division 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you've got 5 divisions, and your classification is determined by the number of boys in your high school. Okay, so there was an equal number of like Division 5 is the smallest, so that's from 1 boy up to 120 boys. You know what I mean? And so everybody in that classification was D5. D4 would be 121 to 180. Yeah, okay. And then Division 1 was infinity. You could be as big as Menor or as small as the smallest, whatever that minimum number was. But I thought they got it right with 5 divisions and 8 qualifiers. We went from 2 to 4 to 8 because that's 32 teams competing for a state championship. The whole concept of 16 is ridiculous to me, because in the game of football, the risk of injury, paralysis is death every time you take the field. And a 16 seed that goes 1-9 has no business playing St. Ignatius.
Some of their kids quit and they ain't even out there. They might not have a lot of numbers. Yep.
And yet it's more money for the OHSAA. And then going to 7 divisions, that's you've diluted the product. Okay. And again, more so in the other divisions, not so much in D1, because it's still whatever the bottom number is to infinity.
Right.
And I'm not for that. You know, we like to say that Ohio plays some of the best high school football in the country. Texas believes it's them, and Florida and California. I mean, and Pennsylvania. Yeah. Right. We're in that conversation, but I don't think. You know, I'm not a believer in diluting the product. And it isn't very often when a 16 seed beats a 1. I think it happened once last year, but at a lower division.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? But I don't ever see a D1 16 beating a D1. I don't believe it.
It's mostly about money and a couple more games, a couple more dollars.
Well, and when they went to you had to get your tickets online.
Now you got the processing fee.
They made a ton of money doing it. Now, the older folks like me who don't know how to do that, I know how to do that, but there's a bunch, I'm 74, there's a bunch of old people who go to games who didn't know how to do that. And attendance was down, but they got guaranteed money, whether you know, it's like season tickets to the Browns, you know, whether you show up or not, that you paid for that. Absolutely. So I'm opposed to expansion, you know, as it is right now. I think it's too many divisions and it's too many teams qualifying.
All right, Coach, we're about to get you out of here in a minute, okay. Coach. If you answer one question, Coach, talking to the kids in the Warren community, this is personal for me. What should a Warren football player look like? I'm not even talking about talent, Coach. Just when you think about coaching and playing against Warren G. Harding and the kids in the community, what 2 or 3 characteristics come to your mind?
Well, I base it on what I experienced and what I thought I saw as an opponent playing you guys. They would have more quickness and speed than most of, if not all of the other opponents that we played. Now that didn't mean all 60 kids, you know, could. And I'm not a guy that inflates 40 times. He knows this too. They ran 3 and I averaged the times. And that was it. So 4.6 and 4.7 is fast for Thom McDaniels. But they could run and they were unafraid. Thaddeus Walker. Deshaun Robinson. Little bitty dudes that could run like crazy, and they were going to light you up. And then everybody bigger and strong. I mean, so those were 2 characteristics. The third one, and I don't take credit for that. The third one, from my time here, I knew we needed to play with more discipline, and we needed to be unselfish. We were not going to get caught up with individual numbers and individual results, and so, you know, those things had to be sold, and I was the seller. They bought in. So that's all I know about Warren Harding, and that's what the kids would look like.
Gotcha.
That's why we did what we did here.
Gotcha.
Because they ran, they hit, and they bought into being unselfish and let's be more disciplined and making fewer mistakes. I'm not talking about, you know, punching kids and all that. I'm just doing the same right thing again and again and again. If you're undisciplined,
even when nobody's watching,
you know, you could read your key 10 plays in a row, but if you didn't do it the 11th, then that was undisciplined.
Gotcha, Coach.
Yes.
The last segment we have, Coach, we got something called Ask Coach Stella. So is there any one question you would like to ask me? What
what did you miss most about not playing once you graduated?
Being on the field with the people you grew up with. Like,
You grew up with me too now.
Yeah.
That include
yeah,
me,
coach. Yeah, coach. The people you playing with, that's all one. Because the people I'm playing with on the field, but there's nothing like to me of giving a check to a Stephon Alexander, to a James Johnson. I've been knowing him my whole life.
Yeah.
I'm looking over. Mike don't talk when he playing corner, so I don't know why I'm talking to him
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Just ignore me. But I'm seeing my best friend over there coming to the sideline, knowing I got the best coach in the state of Ohio, that not only coaching me, but is giving confidence in me and telling me, Danny, if you see it, you change it. And I don't care what nobody say. I don't care what the coaches say. I'm telling you, if you see it, believe in it, check it, change it. I miss them nights, coach. I miss saying here and see what you hit.
Yeah.
And you pacing and saying, Coach Rich, Coach Leon, and giving everybody their 30 seconds or a minute, however time, I don't know how much time they had, but all of that type of stuff. So, Coach, I miss all of it. And that's part of the reason why I coach, because you're never going to get that feeling back. And now that I'm not coaching, I miss being in the office with the coaches, going to scout with the coaches, getting the game, playing together.
I miss it every day.
Adjusting at halftime, being with the kids. Yeah. So, Coach, I miss all of it.
Yep. So
I miss all of it, Coach, and I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for everything you put in me. A lot of the stuff I say don't look like Tarzan and play like Jane. All right, that's it. I'm going to let Dante do his thing. Go ahead, Dante.
I just told my grandson that. Don't go to John Carroll and look like Tarzan and play like Canton.
That's where I got it from, y'all, right here. That's where I got it from.
Now that will offend all the ladies in the audience.
No disrespect. No disrespect. Just football talk. No disrespect.
Yeah. My wife would like. She'd agree with that. You know.
I love you, Miss McD.
I mean,
Love you too, Dan.
I mean, I'm going to be real. I barely even know what you're talking about. But Coach McDaniels, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for joining us. This is the first episode of Legends Edition episode of Between the Lines with Coach Stella, and we were honored to have you on. I mean, legend at Canton McKinley, legend here at Warren G. Harding, and a recent inductee in the first ever National High School Football Hall of Fame right in Canton. Coach, God bless you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
I
much.
look for reasons to come back to Warren, Ohio.
Got it?
Okay.
Before we go, I want to give a special shout out to my brother L and the Interviewers Media crew for putting this on and being behind this. Special shout out to Coach Francos for letting us do it here. Special shout out to my boy Don C. This is Don C. This is what y'all call him when y'all see him. This is Don C. Special thanks to Warren, Ohio, to my kids, my family, and to all the kids that I'm around. Y'all don't know how much y'all push me to be a better person. So thank you. I love everybody. We out.
Thank you.
It's a wrap.